Pak Vitor, how are you? Are you going well?
Hola, good
Hola,
morning.
bom dia there. How's
Good
everything?
morning.
How's
I don't
everything?
listen.
Can you hear
Apa
my voice?
kabar?
Baik. Can you hear my voice?
Baik.
Can you
I'm
hear my
trying to.
voice? Hello? Hello?
Hello.
Can you
I'm
hear my
listening
voice?
you, but it's so
Oh.
low.
Can you hear my voice right now?
A little bit.
Can you hear my voice?
I will.
Can you?
Okay.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's my. Okay. Or you listen to me?
Yes. I can listen to you.
Okay now. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Baik. Okay.
So how's everything? Everything's
It
good?
was very good. Yes.
Yeah.
Very hot.
How's Vietnam? Very hot.
Yeah. That's okay for me. I prefer than the cold here in Portugal.
Yeah.
Ready? I'm here.
So today we will like introduce you to our student to present about the Portuguese presence in Indonesia and why the Portuguese came and established Estaduda India, and what are the available sources, including primary or secondary sources regarding to Portuguese presence in Indonesia. So we want to discuss about that. But firstly, we will try to display our department profile. Then we will introduce you, and we will ask you to deliver a speech for 40 or 50 minutes, then Q&A session. So
Okay.
yeah. So can we
Very
start?
good. Very good.
Yeah, can we start right now?
Start now.
Yeah.
I have PowerPoints. I will try to. Okay.
You want to display by yourself or me? You need an assistant or bisa jadikan co-host gak? Co-host Pak Vitor.
Oh, the Zoom meeting. Okay.
Can you try your PowerPoint? So before we start.
Yes.
Yeah. Great.
I'm sorry. It's
Yeah.
in Portuguese, but I will translate for you. Okay.
Yes. Don't worry.
It's okay.
Yes.
It's very easy.
Yeah.
I know Professor Daya is able to translate to help, but it's a beginning to your comprehension of Portuguese sources.
Yeah. So you need to close for a while, and we need to start our guest lecture. So my student will display our university profile.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will close here. Okay.
Yes.
And you, okay, please.
Putar videonya. Ya. Sambil diputar sambil dimasukkan. Kan iki apa?
Tuntunmu untuk bijak mengambil langkah. Dimulai dari sini, tekad besar akan tercipta. Dari mereka yang siap menggali dan berbagi ilmu untuk generasi penerus bangsa. Di tempat ini, jurusan sejarah Universitas Negeri Malang ilmu. Sejarah menuntunmu untuk bijak mengambil langkah. Dimulai dari sini, tekad besar akan tercipta dari mereka yang siap menggali dan berbagi ilmu. Untuk generasi penerus bangsa. Di tempat ini, jurusan sejarah Universitas Negeri Masa
Oktober 1954 Melangga. Pada tanggal 1 Mei 1963, Universitas Airlangga berubah menjadi IKIP Malang. Dengan demikian, kita sebagai prodi sudah cukup memiliki pengalaman panjang. Pendidikan sejarah, ilmu sejarah mendapatkan nilai akreditasi A, dan prodi S2 pendidikan.
Saya Raka Hino.
Saya Haujir Analia.
Saya
Bibit Anggraini.
Zain Lasan.
Saya lulusan dari pendidikan
Sejarah.
Saya senang bisa berkuliah di jurusan sejarah Universitas Negeri Malang.
Salah satu hal yang perlu saya syukuri di hidup saya.
Karena
mereka akan berhenti ketika langkahmu tidak dimulai. Wujudkan cita-cita mereka dengan semangat dan tekad besar dari pendahulu bangsa. Berpijak dan melangkahlah dari sejarah. Ciptakan lompatan besar untuk negeri. Menengok dari sejarah, tapi tidak untuk kembali.
Thank you. Welcome to History Department, Professor Vitor Teixeira, and welcome participants. So today we have European guest from Porto, Professor Vitor Teixeira. Let me introduce Professor Teixeira first. He is, as we know, as an associate professor at the University of Fernando Pessoa in Porto. He was born in lovely city of Porto in 1969, but lives in Vila Nova Gaia, having already lived and worked in Macau. He graduated in history, completed a master in medieval history, completed his PhD, all program at the Faculty of Arts at the University of Porto, Portugal. In addition to his academic career, teaching, research, university extension, his personal goals, including consultancy, dissemination, and communication of science participation in scientific and social projects, and the design of travel and cultural programs. His areas of expertise and activity since 1993 are history, Portugal, universal Portuguese expansion in the world, intercultural and religious relations, Portugal, Indonesia, historical relations, Islam and Christianity, religious phenomena, Oriental religions, history of art and heritage, Portuguese expansion, Luso-Oriental art, iconography, artistic traditions, rare and ancient book history evaluation and taxation, culture and geopolitics and geostrategy, focusing on Asia with emphasis on Far East, Southeast Asia, Middle East, Indo-Pacific, and the history and culture of wine as well as the history of the human economy. He has published scientific and knowledge dissemination journals, books, and book chapters in these areas. As hobbies beside traveling, as I also love it, he loves reading old books, swimming, diving, and having contact with nature. So for the first session, we will ask Professor Vitor Teixeira to present on the topic of Portuguese expansion to Indonesian archipelago. So we want to know why the Portuguese came and established Estado da India or Portuguese India. So, and the second thing, and it's important thing for us, what are the available sources, including primary, secondary, or tertiary sources, literature for our study. So besides waiting further, Professor Vitor Teixeira, time and Zoom is yours.
Thank you. Terima kasih. I'm so glad to be here, to be present in your classes, to share a Portuguese point of view, but historical approach about the Portuguese-Indonesian relations. Thank you to Professor Daya Vijaya, so resilient and persistent to keep in touch this cooperation, this partnership. It's very important and interesting. He has, since I met him here in Portugal, about the development of a new approach on the historiography of Indonesia and Portugal. His doctorate was wonderful, in my opinion. I have to state this concerning this topic. He summarized, he did a perfect actualization. He put in nowadays the topic not in an Eurocentric perspective, but a worldwide view, focus on the Indonesian, of course, important perspective in these post-colonial studies in this area of a new scientific approach. So I will make a synthesis about why the Portuguese came to Asia, how the Portuguese start to settle in Asia. It's a very, of course, complex topic, but we can systematize this. I will make a kind of a synthesis of the essential Portuguese sources, primary and secondary sources. It's very important, in my opinion. We check through the eyes of foreigners how they saw our country, our peoples, how they analyze our history. It's a crossroads historical approach, of course, but we have to create a databases on the Portuguese wall of the sources. I began myself this project now with your university in the person of Professor Daya Negri Vijaya to start a project of the creation of a corpus of the entire texts or dimensions on Indonesia, on the archipelago, and even from Aceh until Papua, until, well, elsewhere in your marvelous and so big, beautiful country in your 17,000 islands. So we have lots of references about this. Why we will not compose scientifically with an historiographical approach and synthesis to systematize this, to offer to the future generations of people in Indonesia and all over the world to know how was Indonesia, well, between the Islamization of the country after the Indianization, the fall of the Hinduist kingdoms, and the period during this fallen of Majapahit, for example, and other royals in the archipelago until the coming of the Dutch from VOC. It was a very important period of history, the arrival of the Islam, the spread of the Islam, and at the same time, the arrival of the Portuguese. And we have to organize and we have to check entirely and scientifically this period to clarify and to give to the future generations a more complete idea and a concrete study and basis to study about this period. And in history, we need sources. So I will share with you a kind of, if you permit me, of a project as we starting doing now about concerning two scopes, the Portuguese sources for the history of the Indonesia before the Dutch until the fall of Malacca in Malaysia, and at the same time the Portuguese heritage in Indonesia about the Portuguese descending populations we have in the archipelago. Professor Daya, if you permit me, I will read. I think it will be better and more efficient and profitable to systematize the information instead
Yes.
to. Okay.
Yes, I think
So,
you can display your PowerPoint.
yeah, until I'm displaying and reading at the same time and
All right.
explaining. Okay, it's a methodology. Later we can talk and when we can discuss, of course. The Portuguese arrived in India for the first time in 1498, using a direct maritime route. They were guided by two main purposes: to participate in the lucrative Asian trade of spices and other luxurious commodities, and to contact Christian communities that were rumored to exist somewhere in Asia. They listen and talk about these communities, but they never know officially anything about them. These two purposes, trade and connect religious Christian communities, had been sketched on the basis of the scanty news available in Europe about the Asian world. Well, second, through their contacts with India's west coast, the Portuguese quickly made three important discoveries. The Asia Christian, the Nestorian, it's a kind of Christianism. Communities that in fact existed were an insignificant minority and had no real effective power in India or elsewhere, mainly in the archipelago. The Asian maritime trading networks were efficiently organized and had been so for a very long time. Although a large portion of Asia's maritime trade was controlled by Muslim communities. Therefore, the Portuguese immediately concluded that They could not rely on any significant local support for their projects, but anyway, their intervention in Asia's maritime trade was possible as long as it was backed up by important nautical and military resources brought from Europe. So, from 15 the end of the 15th century on, the Portuguese began the construction of a large and solid network of factories and fortresses on the west coast of India, investing in this project quite significant human and material resources. They had two main strategic goals in mind. First, to get hold of the largest possible quota of the Asian trade in luxury goods to redirect uh, their part of Asia straight into Europe through the Cape route over which they had a tight and undisputed control. But the Portuguese, through their dealings with Asia, soon will make truly amazing discoveries of unforeseen consequences. On the one hand, Asia's trades were functioning according to a logic of their own, with the well-defined routes and well-articulated trading mechanisms. Therefore, it was very difficult to participate only in the trade of specific region or only in the trade of a specific commodity. Two examples will suffice. If the Portuguese wanted to buy Chinese silks and porcelains, they had to trade them for Southeast Asian spices and incenses. And if they wanted to acquire the cloth from Maluku, they had to exchange it for Bengali textiles. On the other hand, medium and long range traveling in Asia's seas was absolutely dependent on the monsoon system. Not infrequently, it was imperative to make long and tedious stopovers in specific maritime ports. These Asian conditions, so to speak, dictated the unexpected growing of the Portuguese network of factories and fortresses, because only a large-scale operation encompassing the whole of maritime Asia would make sense and therefore would be profitable enough. So, number 5, the Portuguese from the outset of the 16th century became involved with Asians' realities in a deeper and deeper fashion. As the years and the decades went by, the number of Portuguese living in Asian territories, either temporarily or on a permanent basis, grew steadily. Portuguese and Luso-Asiatic communities sprouted all over Asia's maritime frontier in a gradual and most of the times informal fashion. Portuguese ships explored all of Asia's seas in a deliberate and systematic manner, and here enters Indonesia. Portuguese involvement with Asia's traditional trading networks did not stop growing. All in all, the Portuguese network spread all over maritime Asia, from the Red Sea to the Japan, sponsored by the Portuguese crown, but also through the initiative of private entrepreneurs and informal groups of the adventurer merchants. We have a formal empire ruled by the crown and an informal empire ruled elsewhere, anywhere by local Portuguese Asian powers. 6. Indonesia, evidently, was very soon encompassed by the growing Portuguese network of ships, factories, and fortresses. For one must not forget that more than a few of the most valuable Asia, Asian luxury goods were produced on an exclusive basis in some of the many hundreds of Indonesia's islands. In 1509, a sailing expedition under the command of Diogo Lopes de Sequeira, Portuguese navigator, visited the northern tip of Sumatra and the west coast of Malaysia. In 1511, the main date of the central hacks on this historical approach, the city of Malacca, one of the most important marts in maritime Asia, was captured by the Portuguese, the Captain Afonso de Albuquerque. After this landmark was secured, the Portuguese were quick to explore the Indonesian archipelago, trying to reach the most important producing and or distributing centers of luxury goods in order to integrate them in their sphere of action. Between 1511 and 1526, in the short span of 15 years, Indonesia's most important maritime ports were visited by the Portuguese, who subsequently established regular maritime routes to the islands of Sumatra, Java, Banda, Maluku, Solor, Timor, and Borneo. In this context, Antonio de Abreus, another Portuguese navigator, first an exploratory expedition to the Maluku Islands in 1511-1512, deserves a special mention. In the meantime, while the Portuguese were slowly but steadily spreading their vast network all over Indonesia, the surviving ships of Fernão de Magalhães, another Portuguese navigator under the rule of Spain, circumnavigation venture of Magalhães reached the group of eastern islands that later would become known as the Philippines. The Spanish crown, responsible for the sponsoring of this incredible journey, was trying to establish a route of its own to the spiceries, using their bases on the west coast of America from Acapulco, Mexico. The Spaniards were trying to discover a feasible alternative to the Cape route controlled by the Portuguese, strictly controlled by the Portuguese, in order to get hold of a fair share of Asia's profitable trades. The Spanish expeditions that from then on were regularly launched from the New World to Indonesia's eastern islands gave rise to repeated conflicts with the Portuguese that were finally settled in 1529 through the Saragossa Treaty that declared the Maluku Islands within the Portuguese sphere of action. The Portuguese, they have to pay lots of millions of dollars in a currency of today by the Maluku Islands. It took the Spaniards another 3 and a half decades to discover the return route from the Philippines to America, for it was only in 1566 that the Spanish pilot Andrés de Urdaneta, a veteran of East Asian seas, found the right route to travel back to Mexico across the Pacific. From then on, the Spaniards concentrated their efforts on the Philippines that were effectively colonized in less than a decade through the use of the American colonizing experience. So they left Indonesia in commerce to the Portuguese. The regular contacts of the Portuguese and the Spaniards with the Indonesian world, motivated basically by commercial purposes, had several extremely important cultural consequences, on one of which will be dealt with here in Indonesia. Throughout the 16th century, the Portuguese and the Spaniards, as well as other ex-Europeans that were working under their supervision, were responsible for a never-ending textual production about Indonesia, writing hundreds of texts, the sources, of a different nature, with different purposes, with varying lengths, and dealing with sundry contents, about a part of the world that until then was practically unknown to Europeans. That is, if we skip the texts of medieval and early modern travelers such as Marco Polo and Niccolo di Conti, Odorico of Pordenone, James of Ireland, among others, authors which uh, relate about Indonesia. I have to remember also the first agreement made between a power in Indonesia and the Western people. It was the Sunda Kalapa Treaty in Java, Western Java. So in actual nowadays Jakarta, between the Portuguese and the rules of the Western Java. You have the pillar in the museum in Jakarta to attest this treaty. The textual production about Indonesia began as soon as 1510, 1511, in the period of the conquest of Malacca, with a bundle, of letters written by the first Portuguese who visited northern Sumatra and Malacca. But it would go on a regular basis all along the 16th century through the contribution of several different text producing groups. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Civil servants and military personnel working in factories, fortresses, and ships, whether in the service of Portugal or that of Spain. These writers, all specially concerned with obtaining and registering information of practical nature, dealing with commerce, location of producing centers, available products, prices charged, money in use, cultural practices, with navigation, larger port cities, most important routes, sea currents, prevailing winds, with diplomacy, political system, power relations, and with war, weapons in use, defensive structures, naval and military tactics. For example, I remind the references of the Queen of Japara. It was very important, the narratives made by the Portuguese concerning this strong queen in the middle of the 16th century, as elected as a brilliant and very powerful adversary and oppositor of the Portuguese rule of Malacca. Well, one of these days we can talk later about this and other people, other sovereigns in the archipelago. Also, merchants and adventurers living and trading on their awan in the Indonesia archipelago and the areas surrounding the South China Sea. In their records, sorry, if they were careful enough to produce them, they took account of a practical information of the same nature, but they sometimes added reports of significant events in which they took part, like journalists. Sorry, I lost in my papers. Journeys to previously unknown areas, meetings and confrontations with Asians, local habits and customs, and so and so. Missionaries of several denominations, religious orders, and particularly the Jesuits started trying to evangelizing in Indonesia. It's another very important topic. When the Islam was spreading through the archipelago, it comes to missionary efforts directed by the Portuguese padroado, by the Crown of Portugal. It was a strategy to to rule the archipelago using the missionaries, but we also can talk better about this topic. So they started evangelizing in Indonesia, namely in Makassar, I'm sorry, the spelling, and Maluku after the middle of the 16th century. The missionaries were concerned with the religious status of the peoples they met or heard about, and with their social and cultural practices, insofar as these could influence positively or negatively their missionary endeavors. The obstacles they found in their missionary efforts. The Jesuits, for instance, a militant religious order par excellence, are worth of special mention because they took a leading role in the collecting and diffusion of previously unheard of news about many parts of Asia. The Jesuits, in fact, stand on their own because of the elaborated organization of their structure and because of the huge amount of information on Asia they were able to produce. Technical personnel like physicians and botanists that were busy collecting and studying all the sundry drugs and spices produced in Indonesia also wrote about the archipelago. As a rule, they registered not only data about the origin, the preparation, and the circulation of these products and their respective medical properties, but also interesting information about the social and cultural practices associated with them, as well as significant episodes related to its uses. I'm sorry. Lay and religious chroniclers that in their official capacities or on their own free will wrote about Portuguese and Spanish activities in the Indonesian world, working frequently from their European posts and with surprisingly accurate knowledge of the Asian terrain, but they built up general canvases documented with news sent by the men working and living on the Asian scene. Well, as a result of the textual production of all these protagonists, we have extant today a large body of information about Indonesia in the 16th century, written in Portuguese and Spanish languages. In respect to letters and other sundry documentation, although many European archives still hold manuscript materials, many documents of Iberian origin have been published in different collections in Portugal, Italy, Spain, and elsewhere. For example, documentação em Sulíndia, gavetas da Torre do Tombo, documenta Malucência, archival funds hold in many Portuguese and European archives, for example. A corresponding body of critical studies is yet to appear. It's here where we can start our collaboration, our partnership, because we have to collect, okay, we have to fix, but we have to study. Many of the early Iberian accounts are also available today, and it would be crucial to publicize and explore them conveniently, namely within common Portuguese and Indonesian research enterprises. Iberian sources on one hand make it possible to study the history of European activities in Indonesia, as well as the reconstruction of European images of that part of Asia. On the other hand, the same sources offer invaluable contributions to the knowledge of the Indonesian world in the 16th century, the physical and human geography, the social and cultural practices of Indonesian peoples, the political and administrative systems, the beliefs and the religions, the more relevant political and military events, and so, and even of the history of some of the more visited regions. Well, it's very important and re-underline what I advanced in the beginning of this presentation. And this topic is clearly concerning about this. So I have a list I can present that I can later systematize in a document. It should be very good for your usage as an instrument, as a tool to you have the references and the small critics like this you are seeing now, watching the PowerPoint, a história dos cercos, the sieges of Malacca by Jorge de Lemos. But for example, I composed a list which includes the most important 16th century Iberian accounts related to Indonesia that I have been able to identify so far, but perhaps we have more than these. They will not be thoroughly analyzed, of course, but their main characteristics will be stressed, while at the same time the most significant ones will be underlined. The list includes authors' names whenever they are known, short titles, references to whether they remained unpublished at the times, the manuscripts, places where they were first printed, dates of writing, when manuscripts or of printing, and references to modern editions when available. The titles that have not been published in English, for example, that I have here are translated and put inside brackets, for example, in my list. And of course, with full bibliographical references we can found at the end. For example, if you permit me, make a small resume, a summary, we can make a kind of synthesis. How many time I have to, if you give me 15 more minutes?
Yeah, it's around 5-10 minutes.
How much?
It's around 5 to 10 minutes, I think.
Okay, 5 to 10 minutes. Okay, so the list I can later send and we can discuss differently, perhaps. Okay. It's okay. The large majorities, it's a take a look of some of the common general features of the titles. For example, I have in the titles from Fernão Mendes Pinto, from many Portuguese sources, to my peers, Suma Oriental. Well, it's a general treatise of Asian geography and ethnography with many information pertaining to commerce and navigation, for example. And I have I made a list of with 22 main titles, which we can start from here to make an approach. And the larger majority of these accounts was written by Portuguese authors, which is perfectly natural because all along the 16th century they controlled a significant part of the movement of products and information traveling from Indonesia to Europe, thanks to their tight control of the Cape Route. For example, until 1550, no titles dealing with Asia are published by the Portuguese printing presses. Two different reasons may be used as explanations to this fact. Printed presses were still rare and costly in Portugal at the time. The rather secretive nature to the Portuguese crown, that is, of some Asian materials available in Portugal. Secretism. Even after the middle of the 16th century, the published titles are of a generalistic nature, official or semi-official chronicles, including, as a general rule, geographical and ethnographical data about the Asian setting of Portuguese and Spanish activities. For example, the Spanish source is less numerous as they hardly detailed information on Maluku, a region which was the object of dispute between Portuguese and Spaniards, and about Brunei, the only two Indonesian regions which had been contacted by the Spaniards. Portuguese sources are more encompassing, vis-a-vis of the greater mobility of the Portuguese and their deeper involvement with things Indonesian. The larger amount of Portuguese materials deals with Maluku, where since 1522 existed a Portuguese fortress. This is the region which is more systematically explored and described, not only from the point of view of Portuguese activities, trade, diplomacy, war, navigation, but also in relation to its physical and human geography. Besides specific sections included in written works of a more general scope, the Portuguese were responsible for the production of several specialized treatises on Maluku. For example, I can talk about Antonio Galvão, a treatise on the Moluccas, for example, and another one, Gabriel Rebelo, report on Maluku matters, for example, and another one, an anonymous, a report on the deeds of Sancho de Vasconcelos. It's a very interesting biography of a Portuguese captain of the fortress with a lot of geo-ethnographic information. It's an anonymous, but it's very curious, a very good start. No doubt the economic importance of the spices ground in Maluku and in Banda, in the general context of the Portuguese interests in Indonesia. I'm sorry, just to justifies the sharper focus of Portuguese authors on the spiceries. Then there are important informative cores in general works about Sumatra and Java, precisely the islands closest to Portuguese Malacca, and with whom the Portuguese had a closer and deeper involvement, either in trade, in diplomacy, or in the war. And to finish, Indonesians, regions like Borneo and the Sulawesi do not appear to have drawn the attention of Portuguese observers in the 16th century. One gets the impression that the Portuguese, from the outset of the 16th century, established contacts with strategically placed port cities in terms of commerce, some sultanates in the north of Sumatra, ports in the northern coast of Java, the city of Brunei, small islands like Solor, Ambon, and Banda, and Maluku. That's where they could purchase the most valuable goods, luxury products, or the most needed ones, victuals and other supplies. Then after the trading system was established and working regularly, they just kept it working, not bothering to look for other trading centers. So it's my explanation. Thank you for your time. We can talk, and I prefer to read to organize my topics using this scheme. It's from this scheme that I'm working to explore and to systematize with Mr. Daya, and I expected with more of among of you in the future to organize a corpus of the Portuguese Indonesian sources, using also the Spaniards, the Spanish, as I try to explain. Thank you.
Another thing, that do you want to display your PowerPoint, or we just move on to the Q&A session?
I'm
Professor
sorry.
Peter, Professor Peter, do you want to display your PowerPoint, or we just move to Q&A session? Hello?
Yes, yes. I switch off the PowerPoint. I'm sorry. And to where is okay.
Do you want to display your PowerPoint, or we just move to the Q&A session?
Yes, it's okay now.
You have already shared your PowerPoint? Huh?
I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. What's happening?
Betul sih. Baik, selamat siang rekan-rekan. Sambil menunggu Pak Victor, mungkin beliaunya masih bingung caranya kemudian mengoperasikan PowerPoint-nya, tapi saya tahu tadi sebelum kegiatan ini dilaksanakan, beliau sudah mencoba PowerPoint-nya, tapi tidak di-share kepada saya sehingga saya tidak bisa membantu menampilkan PowerPoint-nya. Jadi tadi Pak Victor berusaha untuk menggambarkan bagaimana kita itu mengkaji ekspansi Portugis, bukan hanya di Nusantara tapi juga di Asia Tenggara. Dalam pemahaman historiografi Portugis itu disebut sebagai Estado da India. Ya, Profesor Victor. Profesor Victor. Are you there? Hello. Can you hear my voice?
Hello.
Yes. Yeah. Can you hear my voice? You muted yourself, I think. Oh, yeah. Probably I will try to summarize your presentation, your speech in Indonesian for 5 minutes. So let me begin with your explanation regarding some approaches. Jadi Pak Victor berusaha untuk mendekati kajian ekspansi Portugis di Nusantara. Do you hear my voice? Dengar nggak suaraku? Ya, jadi Profesor Victor, I will try to summarize your speech for a minute in Indonesia. So, oh, yes. Jadi tadi saya ulangi lagi ketiga kalinya, saya mohon maaf. Jadi tadi Pak Victor berusaha untuk mendekati ekspansi Portugis ke Nusantara. Jadi memang di Portugal sangat banyak sumber yang melimpah tentang Indonesia, tentu saja pada abad Portugis yaitu abad 16-17 terutama di daerah Kepulauan Indonesia, tetapi untuk daerah seperti Nusa Tenggara dan juga Timor, sumber-sumber Portugis tentu saja available sampai abad ke-20. Oleh karena itu, Pak Victor mengungkapkan bahwa korpus atau archival collection itu sangat penting bagi generasi penerus serta bagi sejarawan, karena kalau kita menulis sejarah, tentu saja tidak bisa dilepaskan dari sumber-sumber sejarah itu sendiri. Dan untuk mendekati sejarah ekspansi Portugis yang baik adalah mengikuti perdagangan, karena yang memotivasi Portugis ke Nusantara atau ke Asia itu tidak lain adalah perdagangan. Memang ada motivasi lainnya seperti misalnya discovery, ingin menemukan sesuatu, ingin menyebarkan agama, tetapi penemuan itu penyebaran agama itu tidak akan pernah terjadi jika tidak ada trade, dan trade itu yang kemudian didukung dengan keberadaan kepandaian orang Portugis dalam membuat kapal, nautical ability dan juga naval ships. Itu yang hal pertama yang harus kita pahami. Di abad 15 kita tentu saja tahu bahwa yang menguasai Asia, terutama Samudra Hindia, adalah pedagang-pedagang Muslim. Sehingga kemudian orang-orang Portugis di abad 15 itu hanya bisa mulai berdagang secara kecil-kecilan, dan mereka tidak banyak menguasai koloni-koloni. Dan mereka pertama memiliki koloni hanya di bagian barat pantai dari India. Tetapi kemudian ketika Second Viceroy Afonso de Albuquerque mulai berkuasa pada tahun 1509, dia mulai melakukan ekspansi tentu saja ke Goa 1510, dan kemudian mulai mengirimkan beberapa ekspedisi ke timur dari Goa. Terutama nanti tadi disebutkan oleh Profesor Vitor, ada tokoh bernama Diego Lopez de Sequeira yang mengunjungi Malaka 1509, tetapi karena kemudian tidak terlalu membawa barang komoditas dari India, tidak terlalu diterima oleh penduduk Malaka, dia kembali lagi pada tahun 1511. Ketika dia kembali, ternyata dia ditawan dan kemudian membuat orang-orang Portugis di bawah pimpinan Afonso de Albuquerque itu murka, sehingga mengirimkan pasukan untuk menguasai Malaka 1511. Ketika menguasai Malaka 1511, orang-orang Portugis kemudian melakukan ekspedisi baik ke timur Malaka maupun ke utara Malaka. Sebagai contoh disebutkan oleh Profesor Vitor tadi, ada tokoh bernama Antonio Abreu yang melancong melakukan pelayaran ke Maluku pada tahun 1512. Kemudian ada tokoh lagi yang disebutkan oleh Profesor Vitor, Fernão de Magalhães. Ini sebenarnya orang Portugis, tetapi dia berlayar atas kehendak dari Raja Spanyol. Keberadaan Fernão Magalhães ini yang membuat Spanyol memiliki jaringan hingga ke Nusantara bagian timur. Ketika itu, walaupun dia meninggal di Cebu, di Filipina, tetapi awak kapal yang kemudian dipimpin oleh Sebastian Elcano mampu mendarat di Maluku bagian utara, terutama di Tidore. Keberadaan orang-orang Spanyol ini tentu saja membuat ribet geopolitik di Maluku, karena kita tahu bahwa Ternate itu didominasi oleh Portugis. Pertikaian antara Portugis dan Spanyol di Maluku Utara diketahui oleh Vatikan, Paus, yang kemudian mengakibatkan adanya perjanjian damai di antara kedua belah pihak. Ada Zaragoza Treaty atau Perjanjian Zaragoza 1524. Portugis menguasai Maluku Utara, Spanyol kemudian diberikan hak untuk menguasai Manila atau Filipina. Ketika berada di Filipina, tentu saja orang-orang Spanyol memiliki jaringan yang sangat luas, karena sebelumnya menguasai Meksiko, Acapulco, maka kemudian jaringan perdagangan Spanyol itu dapat dikoneksikan antara Acapulco di Meksiko dengan Manila. Ketika Habsburg Empire berkuasa, Portugal dikuasai oleh Spanyol, maka kemudian jaringan perdagangannya sangat luar biasa besar. Koloni-koloni Portugis menjadi koloni dari Spanyol, sehingga pada akhir abad 16 kita tahu Malaka itu juga dikoneksikan dengan Manila dan juga Acapulco. Perdagangan budak dari India, dari Jawa, dari Nusa Tenggara dijual ke Malaka, kemudian dari Malaka dijual ke Manila, dari Manila dijual lagi ke Acapulco. Ini yang kemudian banyak contoh lainnya menurut Profesor Vitor untuk digali terkait Luso-Indonesian interaction. Ada contoh tadi di Kalapa, karena kita tahu di Asia Tenggara Padrau atau Portuguese Pilots itu tersimpan di Museum Nasional di Jakarta. Kemudian ada kisah Queen of Jepara, Ratu Kalinyamat, juga disampaikan oleh Profesor Vitor. Selain kemudian ada ekspedisi secara formal, tentu saja ada beberapa tokoh-tokoh informal yang kemudian melancong ke Nusantara. Sebut saja ada pedagang Misalnya Fernandes Pinto itu juga kemudian menjadi tokoh penting untuk mengkaji hubungan dagang antara Malaka dan juga Patani. Kemudian ada beberapa tokoh-tokoh missionaries, Francis Xavier, yang kemudian membawai Jesuit juga disebutkan oleh Profesor Vitor. Ada beberapa sumber yang dapat kita gunakan, tetapi harus kita kritisi kembali. Itu yang tadi disebutkan oleh Profesor Vitor, seperti misalnya Documentação para a História de Português Oriental, Insulindia, itu juga perlu untuk kita kritisi kembali. Masih banyak sumber-sumber, arsip-arsip, surat-surat yang tidak teridentifikasi. Kemudian misalnya karya dari Jorge Lemos, Historia Circus de Malacca juga harus kita cermati kembali. Walaupun Biblioteca Portugesa sudah menampilkan secara online, sudah dipublikasikan, tetapi kita harus mencari sumber orisinalnya dan kita bisa kritik kembali, kita bisa ulas kembali dari perspektif yang lebih beragam. Kemudian ada beberapa sumber lagi, archival collection, Gavetas Toyotombu, Documenta Malukensia juga disebutkan. Tentu saja untuk memahami Indonesia, terutama Jawa, tidak bisa kita lepaskan dari buku atau karya dari Tume Pires, yaitu Suma Oriental. Ini yang kemudian harus kita kaji kembali. Memang sumber sudah tersedia, tetapi jika kita mendekati dengan perspektif yang berbeda, itu akan menambah eksplorasi dan juga keberagaman historiografi kita. Profesor Vitor?
Yes.
Oh ya. Do you want to display your PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Just move to Q&A session.
I agree with your conclusions. My poor Bahasa Indonesia. I concur.
We can talk later.
Yes, this is a PowerPoint where sorry, I will display. Okay, this I base this to here in Portugal. I use this to trying to fund to support. It was a PowerPoint part of this I presented to some authorities and my university to start my research about Portuguese-Indonesian relations. I have some clues, Mr. Daya, if you permit me, which they are very, in my opinion, important to create, to make an abstract of the research clues, the main research clues. They are simply 7, some conclusions to present when I will display the PowerPoint. So, first one, before the coming of the Portuguese, there were harbor cities, towns of the Hindu, Buddhist, and Islamic kingdoms, which functioned as capital cities of the kingdom as well as harbor cities, towns. They had developed their regional and international trade that was important for getting revenues, population, and cultural contacts for these kingdoms. These 7 points, they explain the Indonesian perspective facing to the arrival of the Portuguese. Number 2, the activities of the international trade of the Hindu, Buddhist, as well as the Islamic kingdoms throughout the Indian Ocean before the coming of the Portuguese were peaceful and orderly. 3, in the harbor cities or towns where the foreign merchants came there were some clusters or suburbs due to their specific ethnic groupings, Pasinan, Pakojan, and so, for example. Number 4, the Portuguese policy was based on 3 elements. In those areas, we can see in this map. Feitoria, the factory, trade, commerce. Second, Fortaleza, the fortress, and Igreja, the church. So, feitoria, factory, fortress, and church, or trade, military domination, and the gospel, the Christian gospel, which led to conflicts, even wars between the Indonesian kingdoms and the Portuguese. Wars took place when the foreigners began to interfere on the politics of the local kingdoms and to impose regional trade monopoly. And number 5, when the Portuguese came to some parts of Indonesia, mainly after capturing Malacca as their basic and strategic trading place in Southeast Asia. You can figure out the cross, the red cross in the north, in the left superior above. They were always in league, the Portuguese, with the Hindu Buddhist kingdoms for political and trade negotiations. I think this topic is not very well explored, facing the sources and the manuscripts and the bibliography, but perhaps we have to retain some of our attention in these leagues between the Portuguese and the Hinduist Buddhist kingdoms, mainly in Java. The domination of the trade route in the Indian Ocean with the monopoly of the Asian spice trade by the Portuguese from Southeast Asia to Calicut in India and Malacca from Southeast Africa also did damage the international trade of the most Islamic kingdoms. It's an interference of the Portuguese in these Islamic trades. However, the coming of the Portuguese in Indonesia accelerated the process of acculturation. Some aspects of their culture were adopted by the people that took loan words from the Portuguese language, the Portuguese Empire, some art influences, and Christianity, which was first introduced in Indonesia, especially in the Moluccas Islands and in the Lesser Sunda from Flores to Timor. The Sunda Kalapa stone and the first Portuguese maps and some sketches we have about Maluku, for example, with the references, the Portuguese flag, Internat, Ortidor, also the representation of the Indonesian archipelago. This was our main area to the cloth, to the spice trades. East Timor will become a periphery of this main focus. And another interesting topic, the number 2, behind the sources, the Portuguese, as I told here in these 7 conclusions, the Portuguese descendants or the people in Indonesia with the Portuguese ancestry, Mardaikers, for example, the Topasos, Tugu, the Lamino people, for example, in northwest of Sumatra. I came to share this PowerPoint sometimes in some small conferences or classes to anthropobiologists. They are really interested to know something more about these people descending of Portugal, in Lamino mainly. Which I have to present this descendants of the Portuguese people. So, Mr. Daya.
Yes, thank you so much. Probably we need to talk to elaborate your 7 points or conclusion in the paper or something like that to publish in a scientific journal. I think it's important contribution to Indonesian historiography.
Thank you. This I have here, I'm sorry, the 22 main sources which I made the summary and the resume. I talk about some one of them as you presented in your synthesis. You're speaking about my class, and you can find, sorry, the names, and I can share with you. I can send to you
Yes.
give to the people interested in this, and some conclusions based. I present the 7-1 because it's more profitable for you. Have the main goals, the main topics of the conference.
So if you don't mind, I just
Yeah.
I just
As usual. As usual. Okay.
I just have an idea to publish about the Historia do Circus de Malacca by Jorge Lemus, but we need to translate it to Indonesian. And
yes,
probably we should write like some prefaces or some literary background about the Jorge Lemus.
yeah.
And
I can help you,
yeah.
not with my Indonesian.
But we need.
I learned 22 years ago, but I a little bit, but I forgot. Okay.
But we will move to Q&A session, right? So if you don't mind, I want to invite my colleague. He teaches Indonesian history during colonial period as well. Pak Reza, Dr. Reza Hudianto. He graduated from Gajah Mada University in Yogyakarta. Do you have any question, Pak Reza?
Okay. Thank you for this opportunity to have a very important moment that Professor Peter had shared a lot of information. I think it's very important, a rare information actually, because not many historians can talk about the Portuguese influence in Southeast Asia. Otherwise, I have one question I will ask to Professor Victor. I'm sorry. I mean, why the Portuguese domination in Southeast Asia come to an end by the coming of the Dutch in the mid of 17th century. From the material Professor Victor delivered, that Portuguese have conquered almost all the part of the world from the Africa to Maluku. I think it's a very a big area in the world at the time. And what makes this very big empire of the Portuguese the decline by the coming of the other European superpower maritime naval is just the reason of the lack of technology of the Portuguese, comparing with the Dutch, the French, and also the English, or maybe any other reason that explain the decline of Portuguese empire in the maritime world in the mid of the 17th century. Thank you, Mr. Peter.
Well, thank you, Mr. Reza Odijanto. Nice to meet you. It's a pleasure have your attention. Well, it's a big question. Perhaps we have to meet the whole of the days and days and days, but I will try to resume. Why we lost so big empire? We had a great empire, but it was not a territorial and land empire. The Portuguese only had a territorial land empire in South America, in Brazil, okay? And later, after the Berlin Conference in the end of the 19th century, in Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau, and some islands in Africa, Cape Verde and São Tomé and Príncipe. In Asia, we had many. It was one of the conclusions. I talk about the factory, the fortress, and the church. For example, we had this system. Why? Because we are few people. The Portuguese in the 16th century, we were 200,000 people, nothing more this. We have to, for example, to conquer Malacca, to conquer Hormuz in Iran, to conquer many spots in Africa, we have to free the prisoners in the jails in Portugal, because we had not sufficient soldiers. We were not colonialists as we had in Brazil later in the 16th century, because we were not population to colonize. Imagine that the first women, the first wife of the Portuguese governor in India only came to India in the 18th century. Before we had what? The system, it's why I presented, with your permission, the 7 final conclusions, because I think it's very important to clarify. We went to Malacca, for example, we went to Malacca to found a fortress protecting a factory where we settle churches. The people which colonized Malacca, they were not Portuguese from Portugal. Well, they got married with Malay women, with Asian women. They created familiar relations, and they created the mestizos. They baptized them. They came to be Christians, or the siblings of a Christian man, as we did in Macau, South China, as we did in Nagasaki, Japan, as we tried to do in many areas in Southeast Asia, in the archipelago. But we face off the resistance of a people, of a group of populations being Islamized with a different ethic and moral concepts. The Portuguese, they didn't offer a continuity of these relations. The Portuguese were more interested. I am Portuguese, but I'm free to, it's science, of course. The Portuguese, they were more interested in trade and to evangelize people, to these people evangelized become customers, and to create ties with the Portuguese rulers. It was not the intention of colonize. For example, we were not sufficient to colonize the archipelago. Imagine for the Portuguese 17,000 islands from Aceh to, to Sunda, to lesser Sundas, and to Papua, for example. Uh, it's lots of regions. Even the Spaniards, they have many difficulties, but they had superior in population. It was a question, a demographic question. It was a economic question issue. We, after the 1525, 1530, when we signed the Treaty of Saragossa to pay Moluccas to come to Portugal, we had in a bankrupt. And later we have the union with the Spanish, the union of the monarchy of Portugal and Spain. Of course, the Spaniards, they rule, they prefer their own colonies than our colonies. We to study the question of the archipelago, we have to see this chronology. Malacca, Sunda Calapa. You imagine in Sunda Calapa, the treaty was very good, but we never practice what we signed in the Treaty of Sunda Calapa, because we had ties not with Islamic powers, but with the Hinduist or Buddhist kingdoms. For the sultanates of Sumatra and the sultanates of Java, what means this? You are signing a treaty with us, but you secretly, behind you, you shake your hands with the Indians, with the falling kingdoms. The Muslim power was expelling at this time the Hinduists from Java, and the Portuguese trying to put them again in the power. And at the same time conquering Malacca. It's why the alliance of Talicota, when the Portuguese later were defeated by a super big Muslim Indian Ocean alliance from the Mamelukes, from the Ottomans, from the India, South India, from the Yemen, for example. And for example, the Portuguese, it's a very interesting topic. For the archipelago was more important the people coming from Hadramaut in Yemen. The Muslim people come to work as a peasant, as a simple worker, than the Portuguese ruling, the captains and the clerics. The Portuguese come with a cross in one hand and a sword in another hand. And using the mixage couples, the mestizos, many times. But even these, they were insufficient. Technological, well, how the technology, it's important, but we have to have a number of soldiers. We never had a number of soldiers. We never had the number of vessels. It's why the VOC, the Dutch come with power, with powder, with power, with cannons, with ships, with boats. And well, they defeated, as a domino came, the Portuguese Empire, weak by the unification with Spain. But mainly it was economic problem. The crisis of the gold and the silver in the prices in Europe. Portugal was very weak. This weakness with few population, we don't have people to colonize we have to make our options, and of course, we only be settled in the eastern area of the archipelago. Imagine, we bought Moluccas in the Treaty of Saragossa, we paid for Moluccas, and we abandoned Moluccas 20 years later. And we were settled with the sandalwood of East Timor, Timor, and well, Solor, Larantuca, and there, it's where we were based. But even with the coming of the arrival of the Dutch, we only had East Timor, Oecuciambeno, and Atauro. Nothing more than this. Well, they were the remote area of the archipelago. But the colonizations was made through the missionation, the evangelization of the Christianization of those islands. These people, these Lamno people, Topasso, Merdijkers, Tugu, they were the small areas with more genetically more Indonesian blood than Portuguese blood. In Tugu, they are not Christians, they are Muslims, for example. In Lamno, they are Muslims, they are not Christians. The Topassos, they are Muslims, they are not Christians. They have blue eyes, perhaps, or the hair like mine, but they have a feeling, they are completely Indonesians, even with the Dutch domination. So we have to leave, we have to abandon of our project of Indonesia, as we have to abandon Malacca, as we have to abandon the most part of the territories in Asia. We only survived in some factories in India, in Goa, in Kochi, Daman, Diu, in Macau, because it was a different story. It was a different places. They were different. We had, for example, we tried to settle a colony in Hoa, Hoi An in Vietnam, but we were expelled. We only had been there for 2 years. We had not population to colonize, even to garnish a fortress. So Indonesia, we built some fortresses in Ende, in Flores, Larantuca, but it's a small area. We abandoned Maluku. Difficulties, demographic, economic, and military difficulties. We resisted the Queen of Japara and the Sultan of Aceh in the 16th century, the 3 sieges of Malacca, the 3 coalitions they did against us, but it was a lucky, well, it was the destiny was for Portugal, but we have to leave Malacca. And if they persist with different tactics or different military guns, perhaps they have to conquer. Well, we have some superiority with the naval and the artillery, yes, but if you were more prepared and furnished and supplied with guns and cannons, you surely defeated us very rapidly. Well, it's a very complex, many other factors, but it's a very, very good question. Thank you, Mr. Reza. I hope I answered a little bit of your issue.
Thank you, Pak Vitor, for your explanation. Pak Reza, do you have another comments before we are closing our meeting?
Pak Reza, you come from where? I'm sorry.
Malang. He is my
Malang.
He is my
Okay.
colleague. Yeah.
Nice to meet you. I hope see you soon again.
Pak Reza, you should mute yourself first.
You're welcome. It's very, I'm very glad to have some material from Professor Victor. That's very a clear answer, so I can forward the answer to my student in my class because I still have any difficulty to explain about how why the Portuguese has cannot defend the main most important strategic cities in the world uh, uh, in confronting another European nations. Thank you. It's very clear clarification.
Thank you.
And if you don't
Terima
mind,
kasih.
Professor Vitor, we need your 7 conclusions so I can translate it to Indonesia and I can share to our students so they
I
can.
will, if
Yeah.
you permit me, and I suggest I will make a tutorial with the main conclusions, with a list of the 22 main works. We have more than this, of course, as you know, better than me. But I will write these the main topics from my class, and with the 7 final conclusions. I was writing during when you was resuming. I put some ideas, and I think, well, it will be better if I resume this in 7 topics.
Yeah.
Even I was reading, but I will send you a zap. This it's in some lines to you read and to share with your students. And if you need from me on the explanation, you know, I'm able to.
Yeah. And don't forget, we will have another meeting
Yeah.
next week, if you don't mind. So the topic that we want is how the Indonesian resistance to Portuguese hegemony. So you can
Yeah,
share about the
it,
episode of Rainha de Jepara or
I will
Kalapa.
depart. I will depart from these 7 final
Yeah.
conclusions.
Yeah.
It's a good start, in my opinion, to analyze the topic as you need.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right now is going to pray for Maghrib. So we need to continue our activities. Before we close our meeting, we should say thank to Professor Vitor to deliver a speech and give some uh, clear sources for us to be studied further. And for next week, we will have another topic, but on the Portuguese period. Indonesian resistance to Portuguese hegemony. Probably Professor Vitor will explain about some Indonesian resistance, for example, Raja Depat Jepara, King of Aceh, or in the Moluccas. So thank you again, Professor Vitor. And for the participants, don't forget fill the presentation. Jangan lupa untuk mengisi link presensi. Jadi link presensi ini nanti akan digunakan untuk membuat sertifikat. We will try to create certificate for the participants and you as well. So
Thank you.
Probably
Thank
you
you.
need that.
Yes, I hope it was good for everybody. I hope I was clear and responded to your questions. I am professor, I am a teacher. I would like to have more interaction of the students and my colleagues, of course, like Pat Reza, for example. It was a very, very good topic. We can make a congress about this. Yeah, because it's so complex. Yes, indeed.
Yeah,
but
don't forget that you will come to Java in July.
Yeah, in July.
We will
Yes.
organize the conference. Probably we will have a lot of interaction there. Probably some students still confused about the history.
Yes.
So probably if we give them some materials, probably they will ask some question or something like that.
Yes,
We will try to
make
force them.
if to make thesis, to make dissertations to the research, etc. Well, as we are talking about, but it's very important listening the students. Today prepare the future, and we have lots of topics here to explore. Mr. Daya lived here in Portugal. He knows well, but what he did, it's a very good start, in my opinion. But we need more and more and more studies concerning this topic. Well, Terima kasih. Thank you very much for everything.
Thank you so much.
One of these days, I hope to speak in Indonesian. It will be better. I can understand something, but it's not enough. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Next,
Thank you so much.
Next week, I'm here again.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
thank
Professor
you.
Vitor.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Professor.
you.
See you later then.
See you. Have you a nice
Bom
day.
dia.
Thank you. Bom dia. Bom dia. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.
Ya guru digoreng coba kayak risol udah digoreng, yang belum digoreng katsu, lo bawa ke itu coba gorengin di situ. Katsunya. Biar gua masak nasi.
Teman-teman jangan lupa untuk mengisi presensi ya untuk mahasiswa sejarah.
Jurusan Sejarah Universitas Negeri Malang.
Jurusan Sejarah Fakultas Ilmu Sosial Universitas Negeri Malang memiliki sejarah yang cukup panjang. Mulai didirikan tanggal 18 Oktober 1954 dengan nama PTPG, Perguruan Tinggi Pendidikan Guru. PTPG menjadi bagian dari Universitas Airlangga. Pada tanggal 1 Mei 1963, FKIP Universitas Airlangga berubah menjadi IKIP Malang. Dengan demikian, kita sebagai prodi pendidikan sejarah sudah cukup memiliki pengalaman panjang. Pendidikan sejarah, ilmu sejarah mendapatkan nilai akreditasi A, dan prodi S2 pendidikan sejarah memiliki akreditasi B. Jurusan sejarah memiliki beberapa keunggulan, antara lain memiliki dosen yang kompeten di bidangnya dan sudah bersertifikasi. Jurusan sejarah juga memiliki sarana dan prasarana yang lengkap yang dapat menunjang pembelajaran mahasiswa, sehingga mahasiswa dengan nyaman dan aman dapat belajar. Jurusan sejarah juga memiliki jurnal yang terakreditasi, Sinta